here's your test.
I think you're one of the few.
You live in the same world.
Yes, we do. We're one of the few people on this campus that we do. And my students have been begging me for practice tests, and I've been afraid to give it to them. Apparently, there's no risk whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that's what I did online. I started off with the online, and here, I'm sorry to hog all of this.
That's okay. We'll move on here shortly.
The first semester that I used the online program, it was new to me, and so I bribed the students to use it. This homework grade that you have all semester, you get 100% on at your own time, I will use that grade to replace your lowest test score.
Right.
And I will take the grade of the final and replace your second lowest test score.
Right.
I still failed about half the class.
Wow. Well, about half of mine failed too, no matter what I did.
And then students said, give us a practice test. And so every semester I would change it. I had a practice test that was optional. And so I looked at the students that did the homework and the practice test and compared it to the other students that did everything, A's and B's across the board.
I get that.
So the next semester I made it mandatory. And again, the students that did everything, A's and B's across the board.
Yeah.
And I'm telling the students this.
Yeah.
During the semester, the next semester, I go, this is what they did, this is how they did it.
You know, one thing I would suggest is that sometimes students don't believe teachers, but they believe other students. Mm-hmm. So if you could get some kids that have done well in the course to write 2 or 3 sentences about what it takes to succeed in the course, and just kind of randomly post some of those comments either on the course website or on the course syllabus. I see when I would pass back or when I would discuss this test now that was the same as the practice test, I wouldn't tell the students it was a practice test. I would ask them, where did it come from? Where did this come from? Where did you see these questions?
That's what I do. But this is the second test. The first test that they had, it was from the homework, it was from the examples I worked in class. They should know by now. Yeah. And how do you convince students that the advice is from other students? Because I have that. I have a sheet that I give them. How to pass Mr. Gillish's class.
Right.
Advice from former students.
Yes.
And it's all laid out.
They're not trusting you.
Yes,
conspiracy.
Exactly. Yes.
I
know. I'm paranoid.
They're out to get me.
But yeah, I compiled.
Well, then actually bring some of those students to class.
I thought about doing that too.
I mean, I did that. I actually, and then we should, you're not getting your money's worth here out of it.
I'm sorry.
But no, you're fine. Don't apologize. It's an important conversation.
I'm relating.
But I think that students, there are some questions that students can't ask teachers and get an honest answer from. So, like the typical example is, do you need to read the textbook to get a good grade in this class? Because there are any number of classes that students could take on my campus where you don't have to read the textbook and you can still get a good grade in the course. So I just brought in a panel of 4 students. Now, you sort of have to pick students that you trust. I had 3 students that got A's and 1 student that got a C, who was a really articulate kind of student. And then I just said to the class, I said, okay, let me introduce you to these people. They took the class last semester. You've got 15 minutes. Ask them any questions you want about what you need to do well in this course. And so that you will really ask the questions you want, I'm leaving.
Right. Wow.
And now, you have to pick the students pretty carefully. But it's also good feedback for the instructor, because what the students did say, or what the students in the class told me, so maybe they were lying, but I believed them, was that what the panel said was you could probably get a C in the course if you didn't buy and read the textbook, but you were not going to get a B or an A if you didn't buy and read the textbook. Well, that could be true. I mean, I think that's probably true. But the other piece, too, though, is that, sometimes students are just not ready to learn, and I think you have to keep doing everything that you can, and you have to keep trying some new things. I think the big challenge with teaching math and like developmental English is getting over this fact that people don't believe they can learn math.
Yeah. That's what I've been sitting here thinking. If I was a student in the class, one of my biggest things would be this huge block that I have that started from way back that
I'm not going to be able to learn math.
But I tell them the very first day of class and try to emphasize it that it doesn't take any kind of brilliance to do this. It just takes hard work.
Exactly.
And that's all it takes.
Exactly.
And anybody in here can do it
Exactly.
if you're willing to work.
Exactly.
And I emphasize that all semester.
Well,
You've got to work for
yeah.
it.
But I
You've got to get
that
what you earn.
somehow you've got
Exactly.
to work past that fear that people have. And I'm not saying fear is what's responsible for 3/4 of your class not passing, but it sounds like there's a significant resistance there.
Right, exactly.
And the more you think you can't do it,
Right.
the more likely you
Right.
you're
Well,
not gonna put a whole lot of
the
time
other thing
on it.
too that I think is a real issue with students now, and I think this is really true in teaching writing too, is that they really don't understand what hard work means, you know, because I remember one of my math colleagues telling me this anecdote where he had a student who was coming to class every day, you know, and doing the homework and was still doing really poorly in the class. And the faculty member said, well, you know, let's talk about last night's homework. Show me what you did. And so the kid had the first problem written down, and it was completely blank. There was nothing there, and then he had some stuff. And the faculty member said, well, what about this first problem? You didn't even do it. And the student said, I tried to do it. Said, I worked on this problem for 5 minutes. I could not do it. And you know what the faculty member said? He wanted to laugh, but it was clear that the student believed that if you expended 5 minutes of effort trying to solve a problem and you made no progress, there was no way you were going to, you know, you were going to do it. So I think, you know, sort of like showing students drafts or you
writing
know,
with them and showing them your own writing.
right.
This was the first semester that I posted graded tests from old students to not only show the mistakes they made, but how I grade.
Oh, that's lovely.
And I
That's
still
great.
mark those things wrong on this semester. So
Yeah.
here's a test I graded. I graded a D and a B, and I put that up
That's
there so they
great.
could look at that. And I said, yes, I'm going to mark this wrong if you do this. So
And
here's
they
your
did
test.
this, yeah. See,
Some-
and
I
then
mean,
I
there-
think
there-
in the debrief, then you would want to show, you know, I mean, I don't think the debrief session for exams is necessarily going over what the students did wrong. I think it's equally about, you know, decisions that students have made that affected the outcome of the exam, you know, so that you're also spending a little class time, you know, showing that practice exam and saying, guess what, 5 people in the class made this error, and here it was, I showed clearly on this that it wasn't. You know, are you guys out to line? I mean, humor is my way, and that might not be your way, but you know, you've got to kind of rub their faces in it a little bit in a constructive and positive way, I think.
It seems like they don't care, though. And if they
It
don't
does.
care, what
Oh,
can
there's
you do
not
with
much
it?
you can
I mean,
do.
yeah, it's a core general education class that I've had more and more students over the semesters tell me they just want a D.
Yeah.
Because they're
I
an
do.
D is
history
for
major,
done.
they're
I
a
do too.
speech
Yeah.
major, no offense. But
D
they
is
don't
for
need it
done.
for anything
Right,
else, and a
right.
D is good enough if their other classes are better.
Right.
And, you know, it would, you know,
Right.
they're not shooting for the stars and
Exactly.
hitting the moon. They're shooting for Memphis and not getting to Jacksonville or something, you know.
Well, you know, we really are sort of really are sort of talking about, you know, what we're supposed to be talking about this session in a kind of a, you know, backwards way, because what we had planned to do in this session was to talk about sort of mechanisms for getting feedback from students that are more positive and constructive than those silly end of course ratings. You know, now do you do the end of course ratings here?
Yes.
The students, is it a machine scoreable short form, or is it an online survey, or
Machine scoreable.
scoreable.
short
Most of
form?
We went to
Plus, we just
online,
went online.
our participation dropped to 0, so
Right.
we went back to paper.
And having it go. Well, that's
We're
pretty
redoing the
cool.
whole thing. We're in the process of redoing
Right. Okay.
the back.
So, how is every class evaluated every semester, or is it a function of?
Just along to, not summer.
Pardon?
Just along to summer,
Okay.
not
All
summer.
right.
And we do all
But
of
even
them.
if you're a full professor and you've taught the course a whole bunch of times and your ratings are fine, it's still evaluated every semester.
The data's collected, it's out there. and-
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, does it make it, are the ratings, do they make any difference? Or does that depend on the department?
I'm sure it's by department. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we usually will have faculty meetings with our chair, because our chair's going to be the only one
Oh,
to
yeah.
look at those. And
Okay.
so we process and do some sense making with them. But
We
But-
distribute ours. Everybody looks at everybody else's. And they're
Oh,
used,
my goodness.
they're used for raises if there ever are any.
That's the trouble, there aren't
The net effect is not.
Yeah, well, we had this. There was this great thing at Penn State when I was there that we used to get these. So a little part of the salary raise when there was raises was a merit raise, and you could be into categories 1, 2, and 3 with respect to teaching, and if you were in the top category, meaning that you got the most merit money for excellent teaching, it came down to about $20 a month. So, but teaching takes a little more work than 20 bucks a month, I think. Anyway, so I think that well, the whole business with ratings is a sort of a sad story, I think, because this is an area of all the areas that have been researched about teaching and learning in higher education. More research has been done on ratings, probably because it's a fairly empirical thing, easy thing to study. But in the 80s and 90s, you know, there are literally thousands. Ken Feldman, who's a real famous guy, has done lots of big meta-analyses of all these studies. At one point, had 2,500 studies on student ratings. The problem, and I don't know, you know, I don't know anything about what you do here, but at most institutions, the policies and practices are about 25 years behind what the research would say to do. You know, so for example, the research would say for a mid-career faculty member who's in good standing, there's absolutely no reason to evaluate every course every semester. The ratings are very stable across the mid-career, unless you're, say, teaching a brand new course for the first time, or you know, there's a big sort of shift in the curriculum, you know, or there's some sort of personal issue that you might have. The other thing, and I did on the, I think we got the handout now. Okay, yes. So the handout again is basically a rating list or some good what I think are good resources. Do current evaluation practices improve instruction? Oops, I got a typo in there. Kember et al. Does the use of they don't improve. So if you look at, you know, that mid-career faculty person and you look at the ratings that they're getting and you distribute the ratings to them again at the end of the next semester and the end of the next semester, that distribution of the rating information has no impact on subsequent rating scores. So they don't improve instruction. Okay, now the reason that they don't improve instruction is not a real mystery. I mean, that's a summative evaluation. You know, they are most of the times questions that are very abstract and are really something. How does this instructor compare with all other instructors on the planet? How does this course compare with all others, you know, in the world? And what that data does is that may be motivational, okay, but it doesn't give the faculty member the kind of diagnostic, descriptive details to make sensible decisions about, you know, kind of just exactly what you're talking about, Joseph. Should I give a practice exam? Should I grade? Should I do graded homework? Those are the kind of decisions that are going to have a real impact on your teaching, and you don't get any of that sort of feedback from the summative stuff. And then the other piece that I think so a lot of times with there's a lot of issues here, is that the other issue with a lot of the summative data is that a lot of institutions use forms which are essentially camels created by committees. You know, people sit around and, you know, Mike says, gee, I'd really like to have a question on the form about class discussion. And Joseph said, well, I'll vote for that as long as we can have a question about problem solving. You know, so you end up with a real hodgepodge of items, and you don't. I mean, see, we know what the ingredients or components of effective instruction are. That is something that's been researched since the 30s, and there's, you know, a lot of consistency in the literature about that. So ostensibly then, a rating of an instructor ought to draw on some of these dimensions or aspects of components of effective instruction. But if it's just a camel that's created by a committee, then you may not really be measuring, you know, what you think that you're measuring. And then the other practice that really is, I think, compromising a whole variety of things here is the the sort of trying to combine formative and summative stuff together. Now we're okay with formative and summative. Summative means summary. Formative is, you know, they're informing you. It's diagnostic, descriptive kind of information. Is that institutional try to sort of kill two birds with one stone. So the formative piece are those open-ended questions at the end, you know. So, you know, what did you, and the ones that are often on there, which I think ought to be illegal, are what did you like most about the course? You know, how does the course, you know, what did you like least about the course? Which is really giving students, I think that's irresponsible. It gives students an open hunting license, you know. So what did you like least about the course? Well, we had this marketing instructor where these got off with pink ties. You know, well, that's irrelevant to learning. I mean, that's not. Or, you know, what'd you like least about the course? It met at 8 o'clock in the morning by somebody who was taught. Well, what it said on mine is class met at 8 o'clock by morning and was taught by a morning person. You know? So I'm cheerful and bright-eyed and ready to go at 8 o'clock in the morning. So those are not those. So then what happens is that it seems to me is that those. If you give students a license, sort of, you know, it's irresponsible, and what that generates is a lot of immature, really awful comments that students make. And now we're back to the sort of vulnerabilities that teachers have and that are not always very savvy about kind of recognizing. And people really get hurt by those kind of comments that people make. And the example that I have in the book is I work with this guy, you know, he sort of called up on the phone, or, gee, I want to improve my teaching. And so I sallied up to his office and I said, well, what are you interested, you know, what do you want to talk about? What are you interested in? And he didn't say a word. He rolled his chair over to his file cabinet, pulled out a tattered folder, put it down in front of me. I opened it up. And the first thing that was in there was a machine scorable form, one of them. And across the bottom of it was written this comment: the instructor ought to use his lectures for toilet paper. And I thought, oh, well, I said, gee. And then I looked at the form. It wasn't a Penn State form. I said, well, where did this form come from? Well, that was where I got that evaluation at the place where I first started teaching. Oh, I said, when was that? Well, let's see. I guess that was about 20 years ago. And I said, and how long had you been teaching? Oh, well, I got this my second year that I was teaching. Now, I don't think most faculty carry around, you know, comments like that and keep them in a file folder that they can present. But, you know, a lot of faculty really do harbor those negative comments in their hearts, you know. I mean, you've got them. You can, you sort of, you know, you sort of remember those. They sort of chase us around. So I don't think that's, I don't think we're teaching students the principles of constructive feedback if we allow them. And, you know, when I talk to my students who are working, and now, you know, most, or at least at my students, a lot of them are working, have you ever had an employee evaluation? Well, how useful was it? Oh, it was just horrible. You know, here's what the person said to me, blah, 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 you know, and oh, it was really rude, you know, and I didn't get any feedback that was helpful, and then I didn't get a raise. Told me I was wonderful, and then I didn't get a raise, you know. So you can see that. So I sort of say to students, well, you know, college is a really important time to start thinking about the principles of constructive feedback, and so how, you know, you can deliver feedback to an employee or to a teacher that will motivate them to make, you know, to make improvements. So what I got interested in for the book was trying to propose to faculty a whole variety of, you know, different ways that you can sort of solicit input from students, which I think are more, I keep losing my notes here. Oh yeah, they're in here. Organization, Carol and I were talking about that. So that you can, you know, get the kind of diagnostic, descriptive feedback that comes in a form that's sort of objective enough that will allow you to, you know, to do something about it. You know, and I'll just tell you another funny story because it is kind of the end of the day here. So I'm working on this book, you know, and I'm writing all this, you know, how you just can't. You've got to be able to sort out these comments and, you know, disregard them, and if it's nothing you can do about, you know, blah, 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 don't ask students these questions. Just the same brouhaha I'm giving you. So I'm off giving a workshop, and they're evaluating the workshop, and after it's over, they send me a package with all the evaluations from the workshop in them. Okay, so this is useful feedback, you know, I like to improve and try to win. And so, you know, there's the usual kind of things about organization and swearing and, you know, et cetera. And I carry on down through there, and then I come to this one, which is a complete fashion critique. So it's like, you were there you wore a corduroy suit to give your presentation. It looked horrible. That was the first thing. The color was wrong. It was not pressed. People that have a weight problem should not wear corduroy. It adds 5 pounds to your weight. The shirt that you had, and it was a head to toe fashion critique. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't need to, I wasn't there. I am a professor. I am not a fashion maven here. I am, I was clean and clothed and more or less in my right mind, So I balled that thing up and threw it away. Do you think I've been able to wear that corduroy suit to a presentation? I'm going to have to give it to the Goodwill. Every time I look at, oh God, that's that corduroy suit, and and so I think we've got to be honest with ourselves that we are sort of vulnerable, and that this stuff is, is not, can be sort of hurtful. Okay, so what's the sort of solution here? Well, I've got a variety of different things I want to suggest, some of which I've got references for on the reading list. There are 1,000,001. If the evaluation form that you're using, that the institution requires you to use, if you have to use that, go ahead and use that. But there are all sorts of other really good instruments. I would refer you to the last category, lots of sample instruments, the book Braskamp and Ori. There's lots of instruments everywhere, but the Braskamp and Ori book has got all sorts of sample instruments, which leads me right into the second one, too, about making it yourself. So when I ran the Faculty Development Center, we had a collection of rating instruments. We had about 75 different instruments. And a faculty member came in one day, and, he didn't have very good ratings. And I said, well, and he maintained it was a problem with the instrument. So I handed him this folder. I said, here are a whole bunch of instruments. Why don't you pick one that you think is, has got criteria which are more relevant to your teaching? So this is why you love working with faculty members. So 30 minutes, he's carefully kind of going through all of them, and then he comes back and hands me the folder, and I said, well, what did you find in there that you liked? Talk about wording the question. Nothing. None of these are good. I wouldn't want to use any of those. So it was at that point I got a graduate student who was working for us to take all the items off of all of the instruments and make them into a little data base, and we had to develop a little computer program where you could literally make your own instrument. Now, of course, you can do that much more simply on something like surveymonkey.com. But it really is. It is good to do that, because the actual creation of an instrument is going to give you a whole lot of insights about how you define good teaching. And if you take a collection of items, one of the other things that, so we had this collection of items, and one of the faculty members told me that what he did was that he printed out the whole collection of the items, and he told the students that he was going to pick 10 of them that he wanted feedback on, and they could pick 10 where they would like to give him feedback. Ah. And he said he learned almost as much by what the students had selected than than otherwise. So I think there are other things that you can sort of do with the instruments that are really good. If the teaching is being evaluated by a CAMEL created by the committee, and the instrument has not been subjected to sort of standard empirical tests related to its reliability, iterative reliability, all those that know about statistics know that stuff, then you really can be getting a lot of bogus data about your teaching. So I think that's good. But what I'm most excited about is the idea of being able to solicit feedback on an aspect of instruction. Okay, rather than the sort of global assessment of the whole course, going after one thing. Now, and this can be so the best example, or a really good example, I think, is the very first thing on the list. Now, most of what I've got here on the list are empirical investigations. Okay, so the instruments that are in these articles were designed for use in research. Now, you can't do a study and use this instrument without getting permission from the people that developed the instrument. But if you want to use I've talked to many of these people, and if you want to use the instrument in class for your personal benefit, you can do that. So, are the assignments in your class designed in ways that encourage students to procrastinate? Well, who knows, but that's kind of interesting. So this first article, another Journal of Marketing Education, has got this wonderful little survey about the character that's based on the characteristics of assignments that cause students to procrastinate, you know. So, and that's, you know, do you see, that's so different than finding out whether the instructor is, you know, warm and fuzzy or, you know, I mean, it's much more concrete kind of thing. And you know, I mean, you can really do it about almost any aspect of teaching. And it doesn't even have to be evaluative, you know. So in my Learner Centered Teaching Bibliography, if you're interested in this, I can send you this too. There's a wonderful article by a guy, a sociologist, who got curious about how students were doing the reading for his course. And so he crafted a survey which really asks just basic questions like how long, how much time do you spend on the reading? Now, you know, you can get some pretty depressing results. Do you do the reading before you come to class, which of course was what it said you should do before the class. How do you interact with the text? Do you underline it? You know, blah, blah, blah. Do you talk to other people about what's in the reading? What do you see as the relationship between the content in the textbook and the content that's covered in class? And, of course, what he discovered, much to his chagrin, and he was willing to publish this, was that about 40% of the students in his class were getting B's and A's without doing the reading. Okay? Now, you can do something about that. I mean, that's a design problem. You can do something about that, you see, and I think that's the kind of stuff that we're, you know, that you want to get at. So the other examples that I have that are sort of like that, faculty and students. There's lots of research. Faculty and students define cheating differently. So give them a list of behaviors and ask them to identify which ones are cheating and how serious the offense is. Tabulate those results and then share that with the students at the same time you share your answers to the survey. And you get everybody on the same page. You know, there was a great article not too long ago that was a qualitative study that came out that did in-depth interviews with students to ask them what plagiarism was. And you know, I mean, they knew it was wrong. They knew they weren't supposed to do it, but they just absolutely were clueless how you take somebody else's idea and put it in your own words. Right. And where is that? At what point then does that, you know, get a reference? At one point, is that your own writing? And so I think that kind of stuff is really quite a... The one by Biggs and Kember, that's a great study survey, which gets at whether or not students are learning things at a deep level or whether they're doing deeper surface learning. It pairs really well with the Approaches to Teaching Inventory, which is the last one by Pross and Trigwell, which is a research instrument which has been used to ascertain whether or not faculty are using teaching methods that reinforce surface learning versus deep learning. And it's a good instrument. I mean, you can't really tell. You can't psych it out. It's a good, and it's been used in about 60 different countries. So there's a lot. That's the last one, Trigwell and Prosser.
Oh.
Okay, that's the last
I was
one.
looking at the way last one.
Oh, sorry, the last one in this section.
Okay.
Sorry
That's
about
okay.
that. So then student and faculty perceptions of group work. That's a fairly new one that I just read. Boy, look at all those ones from the Journal of Marketing Education. And I got some communication education ones too. People in marketing know how to do surveys, don't they?
Yeah.
So
At least we do a lot of them.
You do a lot of them. So that's, I think, why this pedagogical literature is so rich. A lot of faculty members are, you know, sort of reluctant to use group work. You know, they think that the work isn't being shared in the groups. And this was just a real, you know, again, this is the kind of thing, if you are interested in how your students are experiencing group work in your class, you know, and what makes these things all work really well is if you go ahead and fill out the survey, anticipate what you think the student response is going to be, and then have the students fill it out, and you can do that too. So, and also another new one from Communication Education is the one about feedback on instructor communication, which you might expect it there. What students think about their communication with you. So again, we're looking at aspects of teaching. You know, I mean, and I think that can be a much more formative sort of thing. The low inference instruments, which are use a different evaluation instrument, I should have mentioned those when I was talking about different sample. The low inference instruments are instruments that ask students to identify behaviors that you're doing. So if we wanted to say the instructor does the instructor present material in an organized fashion? Okay, that's still, no, okay, so that's still an abstract. Organization is a sort of like an abstract thing. What you want to know is what behaviors you are using that do or don't convey organization. So the low inference behaviors are ones that have behaviors that the research has identified that are frequently associated with organization. Okay, so then you can see, does the instructor give presentations that facilitate note-taking? Okay, well, that's a very concrete thing. And the power of that, of course, is that Carol and I were discussing here. I'm not going to be, you can't change the way you are, or it's very difficult to change the way you are. I'm not organized, I'm not very organized, all right? But I can change some things that I do. I can put a skeleton outline on the side of the board. I can go to class with a little card that tells me what the 3 most important ideas are that I need to get across, and I can use that at the end of the period to help students summarize what we should have talked about in class. You see? So those are behaviors. So it's a lot easier to think about changing teaching behaviors as opposed to sort of changing the way you are. I'm going to be enthusiastic this semester. Oh, no. I mean, like as if you could put that on, Well, enthusiasm is conveyed by all sorts of different behaviors, First thing is to start by analyzing which behaviors fit comfortably with who you are and how you teach. Second thing to do is, get your feedback, student feedback, or somebody else's feedback on how often you're doing those, and then identify something you could do more. You see, and that's you beat yourself over the head by trying to, get yourself. I mean, it's like every time I go on a diet, oh my God, I have to lose 75 pounds. It's just overwhelming, especially with all that kind of food. Yeah. So anyway, I think that those are, those are really good. The other thing that I would suggest too is that. That you can still ask stupid students, it's a long day, open-ended queries that are focused, so you don't ask them what did you like most or least about the course, but you're saying, when in this course did you find yourself most motivated to study? When in this course were you most confident that you understood? When did you find yourself confused and frustrated in the course? So then you get some kind of like specific sorts of, specific kinds of things which I think are still open-ended queries, but not these kind of like, comment whatever you will. Another one that I included in the book, which I thought was really interesting, was out of teaching psychology, in which as a sort of at the end of the course, let's see if I can find that. That was it was such a good prompt for yeah. This is in an article by 2000. Okay, so they're giving this prompt to students. I'm interested in what students remember from this course. Let your mind wander freely as you do this assignment. Think back on the semester as a whole and report to me the first 10 things that come to mind as you answer this question. What do you remember about this course? Don't edit your thinking as you report your memories. Don't worry about your memories being correct. Simply review the course in your mind and report to me what you remember. All right, now what do you think they found? What did they... this is part of a study now. What would you guess were the most memorable events that student would report about a course? This is a general psych course.
I'm thinking about my general psych course. It's a study on cockroaches.
A study on cockroaches, yeah. It was, I mean,
bizarre kinds of things,
bizarre
narratives,
kinds of stuff.
Narratives, teacher stories.
Teacher stories.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically what they found were a lot of the sort of the active learning kind of things, when students did things, but I think, those kind of bizarre things too are sort of memorable as well. So I think there are ways. Another thing that I think is useful, which goes along with the suggestion that we had before, you know, at the end of the course, write a letter, you know, to another student, tell them what they need to do to succeed in this course. Write a letter to another student. You know, assume you'd like to do better in this course than you did this semester. If you were going to do this course over again, what would you do differently? And, you know, I mean, I think those are queries that will give you some really kind of valuable insight without being open-ended kind of things. Have you used any of these kind of things? Yeah,
I actually did. I just got finished reading the book, and in the middle of that section, I was doing the midterm grades for all my students, and I thought, well, what a perfect time. I'll let them give me, not me, but the class, a midterm grade. And so I gave them a questionnaire. I didn't do anything scientific.
No, that's all right.
It was
You don't
just the stuff that I wanted to know, was this effective?
Right.
And most of it was, I got them, you know, A, B, C, D, F, and I gave them what each one of those was worth. What it meant. Like, A is, this really helped me learn the concept.
Sure.
And F is, I didn't even attempt it. But anyway, and I had 2 open-ended questions at the end. One was, how could your learning be enhanced in the classroom?
Yeah, right.
And no, I learned how not to do it too. And how could your learning be enhanced at home? Because I was trying to figure out all the different assignments and stuff that I do, and all the different things we do in class, and I listed them out, each one individually up above. And I was amazed that about at least half of the students, when I asked them that open-ended question, I think it may have been guilt talking or something else, but they said, I could have come to class more prepared. I should have read the chapter before. I should have. It was that kind of stuff instead of a reflection on what would have helped in the classroom that I could have done. It was what they could have done.
And that's, you want students to own some of that.
I was really glad that it made them think about it, and it was good to do it in the middle of the semester, so maybe they learned from it. But it wasn't coming back what I was looking for.
See, there's some real helpful stuff in the student rating research, too. You know, like I will say to new faculty members, if you want to know an easy way to improve your ratings, end of course ratings anywhere between 5 to 10%, this is well documented in research, probably 5 or 6 different studies that have looked at this. Give a mid-semester evaluation in the course. You don't even have to use the same instrument that you use at the end, but do some sort, give students an opportunity to give you some feedback at the midterm of the midpoint of the course. Respond to that feedback in class. You don't have to, I mean, if students say, I always say to students, you know, what would most improve your learning in this course? And they'll say, get rid of the essay tests, you know. And I'll say, well, you know, I don't think that's a mandate for change, even though the majority of students would say that. But what I think that is an indication is that I need to explain the educational rationale behind why I use those better. If you talk to the students about the results, that'll improve your intercourse ratings between 5 and 10%.
The other thing is that one of the students said she saved at least half of the time it took to do all the homework if she read the chapter before we presented it in class, which they're all supposed to be doing, but it was really neat because then I could share that with the class.
Exactly.
If y'all want to cut down half the time of your homework, read the chapter first. You know.
Yeah.
So it was really a valuable thing for me. Yeah. I'll change it next time a little bit in certain ways.
Oh, sure. You're always going to sort of cost.
But thank you for the idea because that was really, and it was very timely for me.
Yeah. Well, but you see, I think that's unfortunately the end of course rating stuff. It's like it's kind of poisoned the well, or it's gotten faculty so that they don't trust what students say, or they don't think there's any reason in asking students. And part of it, you know, like somebody wrote an article which I quoted in the book here that was very, very critical of how students complete the end of course rating things. And see, this is another problem with us, overrating every damn class they go to. And they fill out this form, they fill out this form for every teacher. And of course what they see is that really crummy teachers who get consistently crummy evaluations carry on without impunity. You know, they don't change anything. And so why should they take it seriously? You know, so part of what you have to communicate in class is that this feedback is really important to you. Yes. And that you're interested, not in whether or not they like you, not in whether or not they like your content, but whether or not you're creating an environment that's conducive for them to learn. That's what this is about. That's what they're paying the big bucks for. You know, so I think that whole, there's got to be a whole bunch of different mechanisms that we go through that. One of the articles I haven't mentioned, which I would really encourage you to take a look at, is back on the first place, dealing with current practices, responding constructively to student comments, especially negative ones. Okay, and the article has got a lot of complaint. It sort of has a way of thinking about negative comments that students make as really being sort of comments that they're making about their efforts to learn. And what am I talking about here? Well, what did you like least about this course? The teacher made us do all the work. Or what most needs to be improved in this course. We need to have to think less. Well, those are compliments, and so to be able to kind of bust those out and think about what the students are really saying, I think that's a really excellent article that is really helpful to that. So I think getting students to sort of involved in the process is a really a nice thing to do, or an effective thing to do too. No, we're going until 4 o'clock, right?
Yes.
Okay, right.
We could end a little early.
Oh no, get out early? Are you kidding?
Well, I know it's been a long day for you, so.
Let me ask this, because a couple of things are going off and all very helpful, but kind of back to the bigger picture. Have you been involved in universities where they have found out some way to move toward evaluations at the end, campus-wide, where those evaluations actually flow from research literature, and that they are helpful? Because it seems like the feedback we typically get is it's a university-wide instrument, changing it now, we're not going to have comparable scores, so you have something that's been used for 40 years, and nobody here thinks it's
any
good. I mean, and so, I mean, I remember my first year here, Mike told me, create your own pre- and post-assessment if you want to get at student learning. And I did that, but, I mean,
how come we're not doing
that? Why can't we do something a little bit different?
The argument that, you've done it for years and so you've got good,
comparative
data, is if you use one of the sort of commercially available instruments, the two that I'm really big fans are the Kansas State University IDEA form, or one that was developed by John Centra at Educational Testing Service called the SIR, the Student Instructional Rating Form. Those are forms. Those are empirically reliable, valid forms that have been used across the country. So the IDEA one, it's got like 150 different programs that it's got norms for. So, if you want to know how you compare to another person who's teaching this history course at an institution at this size, they can give you that data. They've got just an enormous kind of data pool. So there are, you don't have to keep using an instrument that, that is like that. The other thing that I think is places that are starting to, and I don't have a whole lot of examples of this, but some really kind of creative policy changes with respect to rating. So we were talking a little bit about this with the department chairs. I would argue against any summative evaluation of new faculty, especially their first year, so that they have to do a lot of diagnostic stuff. They've got a mentor, they've got a teaching center, so that it's not that they're not evaluating. They're getting feedback from students, but it doesn't count. You take that sort of onus off. The same thing should be true for mid-career faculty. Mid-career faculty member who is in good standing. I worked with one institution where a person can apply for a year's exemption from the summative evaluation. Or a person can apply for an exemption for the evaluation of a course that they want to redesign, or a brand new course that they've never taught before. And again, there's some fairly good research here. If you radically revise a course, your ratings are probably going to go down. Now, there's a couple of studies which, and I don't think there's enough empirical data to say this hard and fast rule, that would sort of document that if you do a major redesign of a course, it takes 5 semesters to sort of get it back up to where it was before, so or if you're teaching a course. So, to be able to allow faculty the freedom to sort of do some of those sorts of things. I could argue more in defense of the end of course ratings if they were sort of taken seriously and really made a difference. but they don't. You know, I mean, what do they do? What happens in your department with somebody who's got consistently low ratings?
Well,
not much.
It's used in our department as a part of the teaching,
right?
Part of that process, and so if you're new,
right,
you could conceivably not stay because of that.
Well, yeah. See, I think that's the way it's used at Penn State, is that people who don't have tenure, they can get booted. Okay. Now that doesn't I don't know that I think that happens all that often, because, you know, then we get in crunches, like we've got this business degree program and we have a hard time getting faculty, and we finally got somebody to teach marketing, and he isn't any good, but we're not going to find somebody else. So, you know, so there's lots of sort of exigences that are, you know, that sort of influence the kind of decision making that's, you know, that's involved.
Just asking about departmental practices, somewhere along the way we established just the idea of developing growth contracts year to year. And so one part of that is discussions about how we want to keep growing as teachers. I think the feedback we get from these instruments is part of that.
It's a piece.
It's a piece of it, and we've over the years done pretty well making sure we're attending to some other issues. I certainly would like to find and develop better instruments, but I think your recommendations that we look at more formative,
right? With
a new course, formative feedback is critical. And then changing the summative one. So that would be something great, I think, ATLE, not that you guys need to tackle that, but we need a discussion about getting a valid, useful instrument, both on the formative and summative side. Yeah. Because they're out there.
They are out there.
Until I looked at this.
They are out there. They really are, you know, there's good stuff out there. And I think that there's lots of good, the whole classroom assessment thing is also, you know, starting, is that sort of formative thing. And one of the things, now, you know, people aren't talking about classroom assessment as much as they were in the 90s when that came out. But the idea that there's feedback from students, and see, I don't think this is just beneficial to the faculty members. See, I think it's also really beneficial to the students. So if you're asking a student to reflect on a learning experience in the course, you know, what made it easy, what made it difficult, what did they do well, what would they do differently, that creates awareness of the whole learning process, you see. So I think it's beneficial to the students to have that too, so that when you're doing a survey of how people are doing the reading in the course, you know, you can point out that some students, well, you know, here's students who are doing this with the reading, and I mean, because if you sit down with students who are doing poorly in a class, and you say to them, gee, you know, you failed this exam, what are you going to do for the next exam? The most common answer that I hear is more of the same. Well, you know, I'm gonna do more homework problems, or in Joseph's case, I'm gonna start doing the homework problems, or I'm going to come to class more. You know, they don't have like a repertoire. Those are all good things, but if what you didn't work, you know, maybe you ought to think about some other strategies that you might employ. But students are, you know, golly, even a senior student, if you ask them to write, you know, a paragraph that describes themselves as learners, it is a long, torturous 15 minutes that they sit there, and they are lucky if they can come up with 2 or 3 sentences. You know, I mean, what study strategies have you discovered work well for you in college? Using flashcards. This is what we do when we're learning foreign language in high school. You know, I mean, and I do think that we're talking about people now who are going to be, you know, really lifelong learners, and so the idea that you'd leave college with a kind of repertoire of you know, understanding.
Not a statement out of conflict. Thank you so much.
That's fine. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. So I just think that it's when we talk about formative feedback and the focus is on learning, there's equal benefit to students as there is to the faculty members to do that. And of course, you know, a lot of faculty members, oh, you know, my God, I'm teaching accounting. I can't take time to, you know, do this stuff. Well, that's where I think the electronic media are really helpful. You know, a Blackboard discussion, an online survey, or something like that.
Well, yeah, I was going to use Blackboard for my online class to do the same thing, and then I realized they couldn't. The way I was going to do it, they couldn't do it anonymously, so I didn't do it for my online class. I'm still waiting to do it.
But you know, even that anonymous part is, there's a part of that, you know, I understand that the reason for doing that is that there's a power differential in the classroom and students, you know, don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize their grade. But on the other hand, you know, shouldn't we be teaching students how to deliver feedback to each other that is constructive, not necessarily always sort of positive? So, you know, so one of the simple things that I tried to do in my class was to sort of establish the golden rule of feedback, that I will give you feedback in the form that I would have you give feedback to me. And so that, you know, if I'm writing something on a paper that you have written and it's not constructive, it's hurtful, you don't understand it, then please raise that issue with me. And if you make comments to me about my teaching, which are, you know, painful and personally offensive, you know, we shouldn't be doing that. You know, and the example I always would give to my students was I was working with a faculty member. I was interviewing some students in the class, and this kid said to me, "Oh, you know, I don't really like Dr. So-and-so." And I was like, "Well, you know, he's interested in improving and interested in your feedback. So, you know, what would you, you know, what would you say?" "Oh, you know, I just get bad vibes from the guy." And so I said, "Okay, so I'm going to sit down with Dr. So-and-so, and I'm going to suggest to him that if he wants to be a better teacher, he's going to have to stop vibrating poorly in front of students." And then the kid was like, "Oh." I was like, "Yeah, that's meaningless feedback. Yeah, that's not going to help a person. What is he doing that is causing you to do that?" And come to find out, the kid, you know, this is this sort of nonverbal stuff that is all intuitive and feeling that we don't ever sort of translate into sort of like, you know, so don't vibrate badly in front of students. And
did he come up with something?
Yes, he did come up with something that you know, it was that the instructor. Well, it was kind of interesting because the instructor, which was something I did too, so that was when I got bifocals. Several of the students commented about how this instructor looked down at students over his glasses. Okay, so I suspect he was like me. They were reading glasses, and you know, he was just looking down over them, so you couldn't see out of the reading glasses. But the students interpreted that as a very sort of condescending, you know, he said, "Well, he just looks down at us over his glasses like he's a whole bunch more superior than we are." And I was thinking, "Oh, God, I did that all the time." So I got bifocals. They just have clear glass in the top. Unless I forget my bifocals. So what else would you like to talk about with this stuff? Or what are some other things that you're thinking about here that would be useful?
Well, I did something similar to you in terms of one time with the BSW program when I was teaching over there. I did do the midterm evaluations, got some incredibly good feedback that I in turn was able to utilize, and the class responded well, but the end of the year, they had different, of course, rating evaluation forms. And so they didn't necessarily transfer over to, she was the most marvelous, wonderful teacher.
A walk-on water teacher.
Of course, that's what I wanted to do.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And then I did use the, in the grad school, I did use the Blackboard, and all of that was very helpful. In fact, I think they were fairly honest, but I was wondering also about that issue about
anonymity.
The anonymity.
Yeah.
I was concerned about that and whether I would have gotten a different type of feedback.
Yeah.
You know, so.
But see, now, I think especially if you're talking about grad school or upper division students, that could be a class responsibility. Let students direct their comments to a designated person in class, and then 2 or 3 students do a summary of those and present it to you. So, you know, so that they still have that sort of. I mean, I think there's a role for students in all of this. It is to their benefit to provide, you know, some sort of feedback that will help you. And why, another reason why they don't take the end of course rating very seriously is it's water under the bridge. They're done with the course.
It's too late. Yeah.
You know, it's too late. It's nothing. You're not going to do anything that will, you know, that will really sort of really kind of benefit, really sort of benefit them. Yeah, for sure.
What is your, I know one of my colleagues who just left, Michael Klein, reviews a website, rateyourprofessors.com.
Oh,
yeah.
He does
He
it
reviews
all
it?
the time. He looks at it
He
all.
looks
At his own.
He looks at his own, and then he looks at other people's as
Oh.
well.
Well,
And
narcissism. I send him an email. Yeah.
Well, but, you know,
That's not
okay,
rating.
well, it's rateyourprofessor.com has become such a huge enterprise now that it's big enough that there is research being done. And if you've only got a few comments, okay, then it's not a reliable source. And there's some evidence that the students who are disgruntled are the ones who are feeding it in there. But if you've got, you know, a reasonable number, and some of the research actually will sort of specify that, has looked at the correlations between ratings on rateyourprofessor.com and end of course ratings, and the correlations are very high.
Really?
Okay. The other
That's
thing.
the hotness factor in there.
Oh, I know. Well, a guy with a pink tie probably doesn't have to worry about anything. But the other thing that's kind of interesting about that too is that another study I read asked students about how they used rateyourprofessor.com, and it was sort of a qualitative study. One of the things that was sort of encouraging was that these researchers felt that students were able to sort of pick out the comments that were just from disgruntled students. You know, sort of say, oh well, you know, he just didn't like the professor. You know, that's not really a comment. But now the other piece about this though that does is that it's such an open-ended thing, and you know, so at Penn State, you know, I was instructional mentor to a bunch of new faculty members, and you know, so after one of the mentoring sessions, 3 of us went out for libations, and after a few libations, these 3 faculty members admitted that they had written comments for each other on rateyourprofessor.com.
well, I guess that's what I was getting at, because I've read
So you
some.
certainly can do that.
I've read some information that, you know,
Right.
that they write for each other, or
Right.
anybody can
Anybody can
write.
write.
I mean, if someone has a problem
But,
with someone,
you know-
you could write a negative response. And
See,
it just seems
why
so-
did that all come to be? Well, that's because of reluctance of institutions to make that information public, you know? And if institutions had stepped up to the plate, and I think there are responsible ways where some of that information could be made sort of public, then we wouldn't have to be dealing with this. But see, I think what you said, Steve, now that's pretty unusual for a department to share ratings. Everybody sees everybody else's ratings. Do you know who the other person's?
Oh, yeah.
See, that's pretty unusual. Most faculty would not stand for that. At least in
and
my
why
experience.
does your department do that? I mean, what was the rationale? If you discussed
I
it,
gotta
or
turn that around. Why not?
Yeah.
I can't answer your question because
Yeah.
of course you'd do that.
See, I think that's the difference between the business sense and the academics.
See, I was surprised when in the math department, I would think that the faculty would be interested in tracking student
The numbers
progress
and
and
stuff.
keeping statistics, and they did well in college algebra. Does that mean they do well in trig?
Yes, exactly.
And they don't.
They don't do any of that.
None of that. You know, what we don't see ratings, or we don't see retention rates or anything. You know, I would be a monkey and mimic the best teacher in the department if I knew that they had a 90% retention rate, you know, with an 80% pass rate or
See,
something. I
that's
would just
really good.
follow what they do rather than floundering on my own. But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
amazed that we're so secretive and private
know.
and segregated, and it's
I
just
know.
nuts.
No, I think part of that's a function of the form that's used. Now,
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about the business school's experience, but when you've got forms that are asking questions that inevitably end up having things that aren't useful.
Oh,
So-
like open-ended questions?
So the
you
thought,
mean?
yeah,
You
so
don't
if
want-
it'd be one thing if we were sitting
Okay.
around and there was something like, you know, what most motivated you, and all the faculty could look at Carol's comments and look at mine. That's
Right.
one thing. But then when there are comments, I mean, like everyone, I've had semesters where this is the best teacher, but in the same class I've had it's the worst teacher. Remove him.
Right,
And
exactly.
which student was in the class or which teacher was in. Maybe I showed up different days for different
days.
But if you've got a form that lends itself toward brutality,
you don't want to share that.
Who wants to share it? And I don't know.
We do it in 2 stages.
Okay,
Those comments are typed in by somebody later, and the only person is the chair.
Oh,
so it's
the
just
opening.
numerical.
They just see the
Right.
numerical.
You'll
So it's
see
just
the
a numerical.
numerical.
You got a 4.3.
So you talk about the numbers and what
That's
those
it.
mean.
Okay.
So are you
And it's all
using your
form.
own department form or the university one?
It's the business school's
College
form.
So the business school has its own form. Okay.
Yeah.
And
I
that,
don't know how it compares to the university.
That's different. I was thinking you were sharing comments, individual
No.
comments, which
comments are different.
you know,
I
can be
can see
very.
with those, they're just none of somebody else's business.
Right.
Yeah, they can
Well,
be
but
very-
I don't think we have any business asking questions that generate those kind of comments.
That's
That's
right.
one
That's
point.
a good point.
You know,
That's
I mean,
true.
that's
Yeah.
the first point. We should not be asking those. Those are irresponsible. And
It's
not-
used in order to do our peer review thing.
Yeah, we use it for a lot of
We
different
do it
things.
to evaluate each other in order to
right.
get our non-existent raises.
Oh,
That's exactly it.
But I mean, one of the things that Joseph said, which is is really important, and very another part that is really sad, is how we don't go into each other's classrooms. Classroom doors are closed just about as tightly as bedroom and bathroom doors. And oh my golly, I improved the one. If I had to look back across my career, and I would say what would be the one thing that would that resulted in more significant actual changes in my teaching, it was when I ran the Faculty Development Center and started observing all these people teach. And it's negative example and it's positive example. It's just, and you see, it's really good. It's good to go see people who teach in your own discipline. I have some good, when I ran the teaching center, we had a nice collection of videotape teaching samples. I had this one of this kind of zany, off-the-wall chemistry guy who was just kind of like a loose cannon in the classroom. And apparently in the tape clip that I had, he did something that was not safe and inappropriate with a Bunsen burner. You show that to anybody in science, and that was all they saw. I could never get them to talk about the guy's teaching. It's oh my God, Bunsen burner, so it happened with the Bunsen burner, and it just would never get past. They would never get past the course. And then you show that to us who don't know anything about the Bunsen burner. My point is that I remember one of the very first classes I went to observe at Penn State. It was an international accounting course. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I don't know any of this content. And I was absolutely right. I got to class, I knew debit, credit, and cash. Everything else I had not a clue what they were talking about. But when you don't know the content, it's like you can see all sorts of things about the teaching, which you don't see when you're, kind of responding to the content. So there's just enormous amounts of stuff that can be learned by observing other people teach, and yet we just absolutely don't do that.
That's one of the things I do like about this year in particular. I did get a chance to shadow and share.
Oh yeah,
Just
I know. I forgot about that
an
program.
opportunity to go over to the School of Business and see someone teach something I have no knowledge of.
Right.
I was able to
See
look
what
at
they're
her
doing.
presentation. The
Did
way
you
she-
learn something?
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah, I've been involved in that. I think, just to build on our comments, I think some of the reluctance at times has been that, you end up maybe observing somebody and you realize, I'm in the wrong. I can't ever be as good as they are.
Oh,
So-
see, that's why you don't
Right.
you don't observe the best teacher.
Right. Well, it's not even that. I think it's partly putting context. I like some of your comments in the book were about, what does it mean to kind of develop your own voice as a teacher and build on your own strengths. So I think that's a lifelong journey.
I do too.
And so if I were walking into some of these classes that may happen to do something really well, I'm okay with that as long as it's a context of I'm looking at what I can do really well based on stealing from that person. I have to filter it.
Exactly. That's very well
Take the
put.
part that works for you.
Very well put.
But I think we can do that. And this
But that was that's the thing that I think the example I had in the book too, and that I just mentioned in the presentation last time, is I think a lot of times when we start teaching, we try to teach the course or like the instructor. And, you know, so my hero is this big, beautiful, macho Italian guy. And he was really good at the Socratic method, you know. And, oh, my God, I tried so hard to teach like that. I just absolutely couldn't. I just didn't have his presence, you know. I couldn't think on. I was a new teacher. The content wasn't there for me. I couldn't figure out how to ask follow-up questions. It was just, and yet, you know, the sad part of the story is I stopped trying to be like him. But I felt really badly. I'm never going to be a good teacher. It wasn't until years later it was like, I can't do that. See, and that's my other bitch about, you know, sort of outstanding teachers. A lot of times it is a very eclectic kind of style that's not going to work for anybody else, you know. And so I think when we did at Penn State, I arranged like a Cook's tour of classes, and I purposefully did not pick these teachers that, you know, walked on nails or dressed like drugs or did all of those sorts of things, but who had an aspect of their teaching that really was, you know, emulatable, if that's a word. So it would be someone who had a really good set of discussion techniques, you know, that had an interesting way of using questions. Or it would be somebody who had a unique way of debriefing an exam, you know. And so it was more at that level rather than that, you know, sort of, oh, well, here's somebody with a, you know, really. And the other thing, too, is, see, this is the other thing I didn't do as well in the book as I wanted to. Sometimes teaching can really be a cult of personality, you know, where a lot of these teachers who are incredibly sort of showy, you know, sort of during that, it's not about the students. It's really not about the students. It's a performance that provides them with a great deal of sort of, you know, ego satisfaction and all that sort of stuff. But it's really not about the students. And the unfortunate part about that is a lot of times students get seduced into thinking that that's a really great teacher, you know, and that they follow around and worship just like any great leader. But in fact of the matter is, it may not be that that person is doing much of anything that promotes significant learning.
I think that was last year when you were here. And when I was reading the book as well, that was one of the things that kind of started changing my mindset a little bit, because I come also from the clinical setting and still, you know, do therapy. So I was thinking about, well, I've got to get this content. I've got to make sure that they have all this content. And that little part that you were talking about, incredibly significant, was what are they learning? What key things are they learning?
Exactly.
So putting that emphasis on that learning outcome, that ability that they have, and also on their responsibility.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I love that. I heard this in a workshop. You know, I think this is another just wonderful prompt. You know, let's imagine that 5 years after taking this course, I meet you. What do you think will be the first things that you remember about the course? You know, and ask about the course, not what will you remember about me, because that's the narcissistic kind of question. But, and then to be able to say to yourself, and I always do this best after a glass of wine, you know, 5 years after taking the course, I meet the ideal student. What do I want the student to remember about the course, you know, and I think that then becomes a really great way to think about course design and so forth.
I'm curious, a little bit familiar with this. I'm experimenting for a second semester with using an exam in a way that accomplishes a couple of things. I actually have the student write the essay as though they're writing to somebody, to a friend. So they can write it to me all they want. I say, I want you to make sense out of this for somebody else.
Oh, that's the question.
So you're trying to explain this concept.
Explain cognitive dissonance to a friend.
It is. Right. So whatever the concept is. But then, so I've done that, and I said, well, I'm going to have them do it.
Oh, there you go.
I want you to give it to a friend.
Right, exactly.
And then part 2 of the test is your discussion with that friend. Right. How did they respond to your essay, and what did you learn about your writing and the concept by your discussion with them? So I get those back this next week.
That's a great,
and so
great idea.
Now I've got last time I didn't do well processing that. I want to get some better questions about processing that whole experience. But at least at the graduate level, that's what we're after. I mean, they should be able to take concepts, make sense out of them, and help other people make sense out of it. So
Oh, yeah, that's
You know, that would work for anything. Because you know how you learn it better when you teach it.
Oh, you teach
You
it.
could do that for my
Exactly.
stuff. I could
Oh,
say,
exactly.
go tell your husband
Well, yeah.
about LIFO inventory, you know, and see
Right.
see if she can do it, see if or you know
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
That could be
I'm
it.
gonna have to think about this.
But that's I agree. I mean, I think that's really what that's really where is that ability to, and I mean, this is one of my big things that I learned when I took that undergraduate chemistry course too, is that I really am convinced that sometimes a beginning student can explain a concept better to another student than the teacher can, because the teacher is just so far removed from that level of knowledge. It just, you can't remember what it's like when you didn't know how to do a particular kind of equation. And so somebody that's just figured it out might be able to explain it better to somebody who's struggling with it than you, because you just can't get back there.
Well, there are 2 or 3 steps that you assume they should be able to get.
Which they don't get.
And you assume you're beginning with step
Right.
1, but there's really a
There's
step
step
negative 1
one,
and
negative
Yeah,
2 that happen
And
before
that's,
that.
I mean, that's real in every discipline, I think.
Yeah. Now, I think, so when I would have students do that, and I would say, well, there's a lot of people in class who don't really understand this concept, but there are some of you who do. Now, some of you who do understand that, explain it. Explain it to other students. And, when they first started doing that, I would just be cringing because they used, real sort of not professional language, and they kind of like oversimplify it, and they just kind of understand it at a real sort of rudimentary level. But the way they're describing it, you can see other students starting to get it, and so I always figured, well, once we get that toe in the door, then we can get the door open wider and we can work on the language and the more sophisticated description of it. But I think if you, oh golly, and this is another thing, see, my husband is an engineer and we just think about things so differently. And now we have my brother living with us who is a retarded person. I just feel like, somebody could write a play for us trying to communicate back and forth. Michael and I, it's just, and he's always saying, oh, it is really good that you have a PhD in communication. I could never communicate with you if you didn't have. Anyway,
I think we've come to our time at this point.
Yes, we have.
Are there any final questions
or comments? It's kind of all over the bookmark. I'd like to say thank you to Joseph, who was at all 3 sessions today.
It's the first opportunity since I've been here to participate in any of these events.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm really
because
honored
normally
that you
they're
would be
during
here.
the class time, the evening
Yeah.
book session. I couldn't come.
Yeah.
And
Well, anyway.
I canceled my classes today.
That was really nice.
It's the first time in 4 years I've ever done that. So.
I am honored.
We hope next semester we'll schedule things a little differently. So.
Okay.
But thank you. This was really very affirming and
My pleasure.
really got us thinking about some important issues. So thank you.
Well, there are. And I can't remember, I mentioned this too, but it's the first time I've read somebody that's really dealing with, I think it was when we had our book discussion a couple of weeks ago. And the idea of paying attention to different phases in the life of a teacher. And I look back and I was, man, so much of this. And if I had gotten in my early years, I think
That's me too.
I would have been in better shape.
I would have been much better. I would have been better at all sorts of things. But it's like teaching yourself.
You can put some
when
on
I
the
first started
plate
teaching, it was the same thing. I started in an adjunct sort of position. They just teach you into the ground with those things. And you lose the ability. You can't think. You just, I was just afraid people do.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of. I'm going to talk with Carol a little bit about one of the things we need to consider is how to just keep kind of debriefing. And I think we could have some sessions that are just for young faculty, just for mid, just for end, and have some hard parts.
So just download the form and write down where you were, and you can always verify.
It's not, I just think we underestimate how, you know, how sort of tough it is. I just know, I was telling Carol, since I've retired, you know, so this is my,
But she's not
it'll be
really
4 years, well, yeah, it'll be 4 years in,
Kinda like Linda
3.5 years.
Yeah.
No kidding, this is absolutely the best part of my career.
Yeah.
And it's because there's just so much, there's so much more kind of like control of your own time and the politics of the campus, you know, and these
Behind it.
campaigns. And I just think that we don't reckon with how that is effective. It's still such that kind of macho, objective, you know, rational, intellectual environment, you know, and we don't realize that some of all this other stuff really saps a person. And yet, then you see, have you read Parker Palmer's book, The Courage to Teach? It's probably one of the most influential books that's been written. I wouldn't say that, most widely read books. And the thing that is really interesting about it, Gerald, is that a faculty member described that book to me as a book that touched the soul of teaching. And nobody had been writing about teaching like that for a really long time. And somebody else said to me it was like a glass of water in the desert. And, you know, I just think that you know, this is touchy-feely, soft sort of stuff. And yet, on the other hand, I don't think that you can power an academic career on intellectual muscle alone. Yeah. Teaching just doesn't. You know, there's an affective component to it that's really important. Yeah. How long have you been teaching?
I've been here 20 years. And then I did,
we just started talking about
I think it's about 5 years before that, I was either doing a graduate assistant or I took a break and taught other places. But I am...
It's a long haul when you think back over it.